Caroline always walked in at 5:42. Keys in the bowl, tea on, same rhythm, every day. She's been gone 10 months. And the keys still don't clink. This is about James. 65. Property lawyer, newly retired, a man who thought his story had ended. Then a 6-year-old knocked on his door and asked him one word. James lives in a quiet, leafy part of South London. The kind of street where people nod but don't linger. He's 5'8", with grey hair that's thinning more than he'd like, glasses that slide slightly down his nose, and the kind of face you might forget 5 minutes after meeting him. For decades, though, he wasn't forgettable at all. He was a partner in a property law firm, reliable, precise, respected, the sort of man people trusted with big decisions. The plan had always been simple: retire, travel, see the places he and Caroline had talked about for years. Italy first, then maybe Canada, somewhere with lakes. But cancer doesn't ask about plans, and just like that, the future they'd built together changed shape. James stayed at work longer than he wanted to, not because he loved it anymore, but because work filled the hours. And the hours were the problem. They had been married for 36 years, not just partners in life, but best friends. The kind of couple who could talk for hours, or sit in silence and still feel completely understood. They had 2 children. Isabel, in her early 30s, sharp and driven. An in-house M&A lawyer at a bank, married, with 2 young kids of her own. And Patrick, a vet up in Manchester, living with his partner, surrounded by animals and long shifts. They called, they checked in, they cared. But grief is a private thing. And James didn't want to be a burden. He also didn't want to sell the house, because some part of him still expected Caroline to walk back in. Grief is strange like that. The world keeps moving, buses run, people go to work, bins get taken out, and you stay still. Isabel arranged for a cleaner. Christine came twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays, from 12 until 3. She was efficient, capable, always on time. And, if James was being honest, a little bossy. They developed an unspoken arrangement. Christine cleaned. James stayed out of the way. He would retreat upstairs to his office, the one room she didn't touch, and he would sit there, looking out at the garden, thinking the same thought over and over again. What now? One Tuesday, 12 o'clock came and went. Christine was never late. 12:10 passed, then 12:15. At 12:20, the front door finally opened. She stepped in, flustered and apologetic. And she wasn't alone. Her grandson Oliver stood just behind her, small, quiet, watching everything. Christine explained quickly. Oliver had been sick, a 48-hour bug. He wasn't contagious anymore, but the school wouldn't take him back yet. His mum had a meeting she couldn't miss. Childcare had fallen through. "He'll sit quietly," she said. "He won't make a peep." James nodded. He didn't really know what else to do. Then he went upstairs, back to his office, back to the window, back to the same question. What now? A few minutes passed. Then he felt a small tap on his shoulder. He turned. Oliver stood there, holding a book. "Sorry, Mr. James," he said. "I did knock." James blinked. "Mummy says you have to knock before you go into someone's upstairs room," Oliver continued. "I knocked, but you didn't say come in." There was something so earnest about the way he said it that James didn't quite know how to respond. Oliver held the book up. "I can't read this word," he said. "Can you read it for me?" James looked down at the page. The word was optimistic. He said it out loud. "Optimistic." Oliver waited. "It means believing that good things will happen," James said slowly. "Even if they haven't yet." Oliver frowned slightly, thinking it through. Then he asked, "Can you read the rest?" At that exact moment, Christine rushed into the room, clearly panicked. "I'm so sorry," she said. "He promised he'd stay downstairs." James shook his head gently. "It's all right." And then, almost without thinking about it, he started reading. At first, his voice was stiff, measured, careful, the way you read something in a meeting, not a story. But then Oliver smiled, and something shifted. James tried a different voice for one of the characters. It felt strange at first, then a little less strange, then, suddenly, familiar. Oliver laughed, and that was it. That was all it took. Because in that moment, something came back to him. Memories of sitting on the edge of a bed, book in hand, Isabel tucked under one arm, Patrick under the other, doing ridiculous voices, making stories bigger than they needed to be, enjoying it far more than the children ever admitted. He hadn't thought about that in years. Not really. But now it was right there again. Clear. Immediate. Alive. When he finished the page, Oliver looked up at him expectantly. "Again?" he asked. James smiled and read on. Christine stood in the doorway watching. "You're good at that," she said eventually. James shrugged. "I used to read to my kids." "Well," she said, "they could use someone like you at Oliver's school." He glanced up. "Greendown Hill Primary," she added. "They're always short of readers." James hesitated. "I'm not sure I have the time," he said. Christine didn't argue. She just nodded. "Just a thought," she said. But it stayed with him. The idea. It followed him into the kitchen, into the quiet, into the long afternoons. Readers, children, a place to be. Eventually, he told himself it would only be temporary. One term. Once a week. That was all. He even had to go through a small interview, sitting across from a teacher half his age, answering simple questions about availability and safeguarding. It felt strange, like stepping into a world he no longer quite belonged to. But they said yes. On his first day, he sat in a small classroom with 8 children in front of him, all watching, waiting. And for a moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Nervous, more nervous than he'd ever been closing a deal. He opened the book, started reading, and stumbled, just slightly, but enough to notice. He paused, took a breath, and then remembered. He changed his voice, made it warmer, bigger, a little ridiculous, and the children leaned in. One of them laughed, another moved closer, and just like that, he found his rhythm again. One session became 2. 2 became part of his routine. Different books, different children, different voices. The children began to change. They grew more confident, more willing to try, more willing to speak. And James changed too. He had somewhere to go, somewhere he was expected. He wasn't waiting anymore. He was part of something again. Then one day, about a month into his second term, the head teacher asked to see him. He sat down in her office, unsure what to expect. She didn't say much at first. She just slid a piece of paper across the desk. James looked at it and immediately recognized the handwriting. Caroline's. It was a letter. Dated 18 months earlier. She had written to the school asking about volunteering as a reading helper. She had written that she hoped to do it when she was on the other side of treatment. She never sent it herself. But somehow, the letter still made its way to the school, and they never let it go. And when James's name came through during his checks, Oliver's mum, who worked in the school office, recognised it. She found the letter in an old correspondence inbox and passed it on. James sat there, holding it, reading her words she had written for a future she never reached. And then, slowly, something settled in him, because without knowing it, he had stepped into the place she had been trying to reach. He was finishing something she had started. Later that day, he sat with the children again, book open, voices ready. And at one point, he came across the word, optimistic. He paused, looked at them, and explained it again. Believing that good things will happen, he said. But this time, it wasn't just a definition. It was something he understood. If you find yourself in that space, between what was and what comes next, in grief or retirement, or a life that doesn't look the way you thought it would, your next chapter might not be big. It might be something small, something close, one word, 1 hour, one person at a time. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who might need it. And think about this. What word changed your life?